As you all know, I'm a big fan of reading, and this month I got COVID, got really sick, so I was in bed a lot and I read a lot. In fact, I read 5 books. I'm going to tell you a little bit about those books. First out on the list is the book that you saw on the table first, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order. It's by Dalio. Great book. It talks about the rise and fall of empires. It talks about early stage empires versus late stage empires. And as you can imagine, he is looking at America and saying, are we in fact an early stage empire? Now, let me tell you, before we go too much farther, this is a very difficult book to read. It's heady. It's an economic book, but there's a lot of stuff in there for even the average lay person. So if you want to see why he thinks America is a late stage empire, grab a copy of this book. The second book I read this month was On Living Well by Eugene Peterson. This was sort of my devotion book that I read this month, and I gotta be honest, it was not my favorite Eugene Peterson, in part because the title, On Living Well, would make you think that this was a book about what it means to live life, to taste, to touch, to smell, to hear, as E. E. Cummings wrote once in his phenomenal poem, I Thank You God for Most This. But that is not what this book was about. It was really a collection of pastoral letters, evidently, that he wrote to his congregation. And it was collected in a form, and there's some good stuff in there. Don't get me wrong, some amazing quotes. I'll provide some of those quotes for you, but it was not what I was expecting. And I think for that reason, it probably scored a little lower than I would have thought. Maybe a star or 2 even. So, if you're into Eugene Peterson, consider grabbing a copy of it, but you might be better served reading some of his other work. Now, I am a huge fan of reading widely. I think I've already said that. So I always like to have an economics or sort of a financial book going, something that's sort of spiritual, but I also absolutely love fiction. As you know, it's my first love. And so this month I read 100 Years of Solitude. It's a book I'd never read by Gabriel, Garcia, Marquez. It is sort of the granddaddy of magical realism. Amazing work. And it talks about sort of the continual cycles of life. The way that sort of stories give way to stories, and people sort of live out the stories of their fathers and their grandfathers, and how history tends to repeat itself. It's set in a fictional, magical sort of land called Macondo. There's war, there's love, there's intrigue. If you haven't read 100 Years of Solitude, the human elements are fascinating. It is a true comment on human nature. It's more than well worth your time to read. I skipped one. I skipped a book called The Gospel in Gerard Manley Hopkins. I love Gerard Manley Hopkins. He was an English poet. He's known for his sort of nature poems, but the thing about this book that was so fascinating was that this Victorian era poet was completely dismissed during his day, and there's probably a reason for that. He was an Englishman. He converted to Catholicism, left the Anglican Church behind, and became a Jesuit priest. And it was that inclination to become a Jesuit priest that sort of colored the rest of his poetry for really the rest of his life. He was not really published well. In fact, most publishers didn't understand his work, didn't like his work, may have been colored by a little bit of prejudice. But at the end of his life, a life that was well lived as in service to the priesthood, he dies, he passes on, and all of a sudden his work is discovered, and people figure out that this man was not just a priest, but he was an amazing and phenomenal poet. And his poetry really caught on. You may know his poetry. You may have read God's Grandeur. It's kind of one of his more famous pieces. I'll maybe leave a link to that down below. But what happened afterwards, he became known as this sort of creative, poetic genius, and now he's one of the fathers, of grandfathers, sort of spiritual poetry that touches on nature and beauty and sort of how God infuses the world around us. it was a truly amazing book, and as a writer I can tell you it was fascinating because it encouraged me, like, keep writing, right? Even when people don't understand you, even when people don't know you, even when people don't appreciate your work, keep writing, don't give up. And that's what I got from this book. I think it's well worth your read. The last book, and this is the book you've all been waiting for, 10 Reasons for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Right Now. It's by Jaron Lanier. This book is phenomenal. You should all read it. Now listen, some of you have already read it. You've read it along with me this month. And you've said that, his politics sort of color the reading of it, or maybe his view of the world, or his atheism, or his left-leaning ideas. I get it, but you cannot discount his insights. And his insights are super simple. You'll see those in the notes. But what I can tell you is he makes it very clear that you are the product. If you're on social media, you are the product. And that everyone loses who's on social media except the companies. And I mean, maybe the stockholders. Like, if you're a Facebook or Twitter stockholder and have been for ages, you've profited. So I guess there's that. But you being the product to drive profit is a really commodified way of looking at human existence, and he really tackles that head on. I think this is the book, if you're going to pick any of the books, outside of 100 years, to read, I think this is the one. Grab this book. It's super short. It's super simple. And by the time you're through with it, if you don't at least contemplate doing what I'm doing, taking a 6-month social media fast, then maybe you're not human. I don't know. I think you're going to love all of these books. Check them out. I have links to them below. You can go buy them, grab a copy of them. Some of those are affiliate links, so it throws $1 or $2 in my kids' college fund, which is super nice. But get them wherever you want to get. I don't really care where you get them. Just grab a copy of them. Next month, I can already tell you a couple books I'm going to be reading. I'm going to be reading a book called Noise. It talks about the flaws in our human judgment and decision making. I'm reading Station 11. Of course I'm reading Station 11. Why am I reading Station 11? Because it's about a pandemic, and hey look, here we are in the middle of the pandemic. And also I will be reading Cal Newport's book, Digital Minimalism. Oh, I think that was upside down. Is that better? That's better. I've read Digital Minimalism once before. It's a phenomenal book. I didn't take great notes on it, so this time around I'm going to take some notes, and I'm going to share those with you in February. So if you want to get all my reading notes, sign up once again through the Substack. I think it's $7 a month. Not too terrible. Thank you for watching. Thank you for reading. And we'll talk again next month.